Chris?
You can find me on Twitter at AFNC Woodward. I will say this: Todd had joked that he something about a meatless Monday. We do have a veggie night at my house, but it's like Southern style. It's
Okay,
pintos and cornbread and cabbage and
all right.
and macaroni and cheese is a vegetable. I don't care what anybody says.
Okay, just communist. I mean, veggie night, man.
And then we all get in our jammies and talk about healthcare. My 4-year-old loves it.
That was great. By the way,
she's very knowledgeable for a 4-year-old. I'll give her that.
I just love that. Harkening back. Welcome back. Gray Durham's Nothing But Truth. As stated, our good friend Chris Woodward. He is anchor and reporter for American Family News, and that is what you get when you lock it in with AFR Talk. Now, Chris, we sometimes I think we should just go one clip a segment because that's what it takes to get through, but there is so much there. It's so meaty, if you will. And vegetarians don't write in and say, I'm accusing you of being communist. I'm joking. I know. You're just socialist. You're in the economic system as opposed to the... I'm kidding.
Yes.
All right.
Subsidized vegetables. Let me tell you.
Exactly. So, all right, Chris, I want to play this for you only because it is important that the American people understand that the minimum wage debate is still taking place, and despite the fact that it's not gaining all the traction in Congress because it makes no sense, as Milton Friedman exposed it for what it is, it seems that large employers are going to sign on. After touting the resistance to it, the opposition to it from the Chamber of Commerce, CNN reporter goes on to explain, well, surprising, two big companies are embracing it, possibly. Roll it.
But some of the nation's biggest employers and the very brands at the center of recent low-wage protests, they aren't falling in lockstep with the notion that a higher wage would devastate business. McDonald's CEO told business students recently the company would, quote, manage a minimum wage hike. McDonald's will be fine, Don Thompson said. McDonald's confirming to CNN, the CEO told students, quote, our franchises look at me when I say this and they start to worry. Don, don't you say it. Don't you say we support 1010. I'll tell you, we will support legislation that moves forward, Don Thompson said. And Walmart concedes raising the wage might be a good thing for its customers. Now, Walmart has no official position on the minimum wage, but a company executive recently told me, quote, we have no concerns there. We have no concerns there. 5,900 people in the U.S. make a minimum wage at Walmart, they said. Out of 1.2 million associates, that's a really small number. This is what the executive told me. A lot of our customers are in that lower income level. It would certainly help our customers. That from Walmart. The president's plan to raise the federal minimum wage may be stalled for now, but states are moving forward, and higher wages are becoming a reality.
All right. Chris, I'm just so disappointed in the leadership of McDonald's and, for that matter, Walmart, but I just want your thoughts on that report.
Well, first of all, businesses, regardless of the ones mentioned in this story, probably could absorb some sort of increase in pay, but those opposed to it are going to say, well, who's going to pay for this? It's the consumer. The product that company sells or restaurant sells, that's going to go higher to help pay for a higher increase. There have been a couple of think tanks. I think even the Dallas-based National Center for Policy Analysis, they had a professor out in California who had thought, I talked to him a month, 6 weeks ago or so. He was of the thinking that they would cut some of the perks that employees would have to make up for this increase. So even the employees might stand to lose some things in the event of a supposed wage increase. But one of the things that she mentioned there was that 5,900 Walmart workers already are paid a minimum wage. That's not necessarily the $7 some odd that a federal minimum wage dictates. That's probably counting workers in some states where they have a higher minimum wage than what the federal government says they have to offer. Speaking of which, a number of states already tie their minimum wage to inflation. So some states and even municipalities now have higher wages than the federal government says or federal government requires. So really, you need to look at your homework on these particular issues rather than just take some commentators, including myself's comments about it. And man, there were a lot of edits in that video. I'll say that.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. The idea that people could be on board with a federal minimum wage hike in light of the information of the states possibly going higher.
Yeah.
I would suggest that, one, when you start supporting federal action and you lean to that, you're going to hurt the individual businesses. You're also ignoring the greater context, as you mentioned,
right,
that if they do raise that wage to the federal level and it is a raise within that state, then there's going to be a ripple effect. And by the way, with McDonald's, if they do it, the ripple effect is going to be automation, which is fine. But once again, you're killing jobs for the lower skill workers who are entering the workforce, which is hurting America. So I just don't like the idea of I see the CNN reporter going, and raises are being you're raising wages, and that sounds all great. And I'm sitting there going, don't put a smiley face on that pig.
Yeah, and a lot of times too, they'll dig up somebody who, and it'll be because they'll cite the economy as a reason for this person's situation, but it's somebody who maybe lost a higher paying job a couple of years ago when the economy tanked, and they've been working at McDonald's for example, some fast food place, but some examples I've seen have been McDonald's, just for purpose of this conversation, and have mentioned how they haven't been able to find a better paying job since then. That's not McDonald's fault. That's somebody beyond that restaurant or restaurant owner's fault that there haven't been better paying jobs in your area or district. Call your congressman or senator. Call, somebody. I mean, write the president. Make your voice heard. You certainly have the freedom to do so, but don't take it out on the so-called greedy owner that you work for and all the corporate profits. That really gets into the demonization of wealth, which is a whole different sermon.
Yeah, but that's been a part of this, and it's the demonizing of businesses and demonizing of people oftentimes using their godly gifts to provide a gooder service, and demonizing them, not realizing that they didn't all of a sudden land on third base and think they hit a triple. No, they've been working and building up, and frankly, that's what statism is doing. It's making the choice between government and business, and government going to business. You provide this, and demonizing them with a bunch of paid protesters from unions standing outside a restaurant going, I deserve $15 an hour for flipping a burger.
Right, and telling them that they don't have the right to unionize and they need to ask for that when, as I've pointed out here before, the National Labor Relations Act already says you have the right to unionize. But certainly there have been a number of cases where union activists have been some of the people out there to make the crowds look bigger and whatnot. I've tried several times to get people from various unions to give us their side on things. I've tweeted about this. Phone calls are not returned. Emails are not responded to. And certainly things that I've put out on Twitter are not received as well. So if you are a union member and you're wondering why your union boss or representative is not being heard on our network, it's not because of me.
And if I could share so many stories with you regarding the ability to get people on, speaking of immigration reform and a host of other things. And this is a challenge, and I'm glad you brought that up, Chris, because it does exist on the commentator side here as well as the journalist side, and we appreciate you with the context. Now, let's move. I was going all Michelle Obama and everybody there. Why don't we go to Ed Henry's question to Josh Ernst yesterday, which talked about, hey, bringing every soldier home. We have a duty to do that in reference to Bergdahl. But he spoke of another soldier. Roll it.
What is the president, we've heard about Secretary Kerry and others, what is the president personally doing to get this Marine out of the Mexican prison?
Well, let me draw a distinction between the Marine that you're citing in the Mexican prison and Sergeant Bergdahl. Sergeant Bergdahl was being held by the Taliban, who was engaged in an armed conflict with the United States and coalition forces. And so what was conducted to free Sergeant Bergdahl was a prisoner exchange. And this is something that has been part of winding down armed conflicts for centuries. And as the President mentioned in his news conference in Europe, this is something that previous presidents, going all the way back to President Washington, have had to grapple with. That exchanging prisoners at the end of an armed conflict is a necessary part of ending wars. And that's something that this president's committed to. Now,
But back to the,
so separately, I don't have a lot of information to provide you in terms of the current efforts underway.
But is the president pressing to get him back or not?
Well, certainly the president is concerned about all detainees or Americans who are being held against their will in other countries. And this is something that the president is certainly concerned about. But in terms of what specific efforts are underway, I'd refer you to the Department of Defense.
Did he answer the question, Chris?
No, he didn't. And something you'll probably see this carry on where they'll be kind of, well, that was before me, or, I'll have to defer that conversation to somebody else. And then when that person gets asked, they point them back in the direction of the other individual. No. The question should be asked. I mean, certainly there is an individual, the Marine in Mexico. His mother has been a guest on AFR. She was in tears at the time, really troubled by the situation with her son there, who has told her that his life was in danger on a number of occasions. And as far as the president being concerned about people being held against their will, there are 2 human beings who are American citizens under the age of 3 that are with their mother in a Sudanese prison right now. What's being done about them?
I think that's both excellent points.
Their father's American. That's why they're American.
I just don't understand the selective outrage, but unfortunately I do, and we'll provide greater context to that with what is going on with the surrender in Afghanistan. Here's a question for you, and I'd like to bring up. Remember, I was talking about people being so smart, and remember, Sarah Palin's dumb, and Seth Meyers is funny. Let it go, Crane. I mean, you're obsessed. I know. Really
have you
does.
ever noticed that all the people on NBC shows are products of NBC shows?
That's true. Yeah, very interesting there. Now, let me ask you this. When you hear a State Department spokesperson make a comment defending John Kerry's remark, Secretary of State John Kerry's remark about a Gitmo detainee saying, hey, look, we're going to go back out there and we're going to basically kill and we're going to threaten America. And John Kerry says, you know what? That's just baloney. That's propaganda. The detainee released in Bergdahl's case, even though they have war crimes, the cabinet for the Taliban, they're not going to do that. Well, we do have the spokeswoman for the State Department addressing that very quote. And if we could pull that one up, it would be great. Let's roll it.
I think it's reflecting what I just said, that when we're talking about the possibility of re-engagement and recidivism, it really is important that we know the facts here about what has happened and what hasn't, and what we've put in place to prevent it from happening. And in a year, these guys will have lived under the obligations that the government of Qatar has assured us they will live under. Look, is there a chance they will return to the battlefield? As Secretary Kerry said, of course. But we believe we substantially mitigated the risk enough. And look, these 5 guys, let's say the worst case scenario, these 5 guys do return. In no way would that substantially change the Taliban's order of battle on the ground. That's just not even logical.
Not logical, Chris.
That's Marie Harf, for anybody out there listening on the radio and not watching online. Yeah, I think it's typical of that that agency there at the State Department. She made basically it was made public earlier this week that U.S. and Iranian negotiators got together to talk about nuclear arms or nuclear power and nuclear research and whatever else. But she wouldn't give any information about it. And she actually stumbled and call it, they were negotiations. And then she said, I'm sorry, they're talks. They're not negotiations. So it's wishy-washy all over the place, no matter what the topic is.
All right, now I've got to play for you the genius line from, I don't think we'll have time. But here's a question for you.
Okay.
When you get somebody like Marie Harf who's slandered Bergdahl's platoon, when she's not doing that.
6 officers versus 1 guy's account.
Yeah. And
six service members.
That's and we're seeing these kinds of things in the follow-ups. And granted, she is just repeating what
Right.
the secretary is saying.
Sure.
So, do you think the media is getting tired of the lack of accountability with the Obama administration on all levels? Is that what we're seeing? Because they seem to be a little more aggressive than they've been in the past, especially in light of the Bergdahl deal. Final question, 20 seconds.
Yeah,
go.
tired, yes, but I think the jury is still out on what, if anything, they're going to do about it. Sure, they're going to be a little aggressive, but it really, you kind of have to look at what they do over the long term, and that's what we're going to have to watch going through this summer.
That is a great point, because oftentimes you'll see outbreaks of journalism and then no follow-up.
People will buy newspapers tomorrow, and then they're done with it after that.
And that is Chris Woodward. Chris Woodward, finish with the Twitter. Go.
Yeah, at AFNC Woodward. At AFNC Woodward.
Hey, buddy, thank you.
Thank
Great
you.
to be with you. AFR Talk coming up. Arnold Allard on the upset in Virginia. AFR Talk.